The office phone on Ethan Caldwell's desk rang 3 times before a small, sleepy voice answered. Hello. Ethan froze. He had expected a supervisor or a voicemail tree, not a child at 11:30 p.m. His fingertip hovered over the speaker button as if he might hang up. Then he steadied his hand. He was Ethan Caldwell, 41. A white American man founder and CEO of Caldwell Industries, the kind of executive whose decisions were measured in millions. But the sound on the line, thin, warm, unguarded, wasn't the world of spreadsheets and forecasts. It was a child's world. Hello, he said, his boardroom voice thinning at the edges. Is your mother there? She's working. The girl, replied, voice growing a little clearer. She cleans the big building where the crucial people work. Are you an important person? He swallowed. I'm one of the people who works there. It was the safest truth he could manage without admitting he'd called to order sweeping cost cuts, including the night cleaning contract. His plan had felt efficient, maybe even necessary, until a 7-year-old caught it in her small hands. What's your name? He asked, trying to stall the momentum of what he'd intended to do. Amara. Amara Johnson. I'm 7. I'm a Black American girl, she added in the matter-of-fact tone children use when repeating something their mothers say is essential to know. Mama says my name means grace. Nice to meet you, Amara. I'm Ethan. Hi, Ethan, she said, as if they were neighbors instead of strangers, split by a skyline and a decision. Are you making a hard choice about my mama? The question landed like a coin dropped into a still pond, ripples widening through his chest. He glanced at the window. Below his penthouse, the city breathed in sodium orange and midnight blue. In one of those buildings, someone mopped a corridor and sprayed cleaner across a conference table, and straightened pens he had never noticed were crooked. What makes you think that? He asked, softer now. Mama says important people make hard choices. She says that even when it's late, they still decide stuff that changes people's days. Sometimes their lives. Ethan pressed his thumb into the beveled edge of the desk until it ached. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Her name is Naomi Johnson. She's 32. She's a Black American woman. Amara said, proud and precise. She says facts matter. Naomi. He repeated, tasting the name like a vow. He hadn't known it 5 minutes ago. He had known a vendor code, a line item, a tidy annual figure. Not a person. Do you like your job? Amara asked, abrupt and fearless. Ethan blinked. He had a penthouse, a driver, 3 phones, and a calendar so full it looked like a solid block of color. He also had an empty guest room, a half-finished bottle of Cabernet on the counter, and the persistent sense that his life had drifted off its moorings without making a sound. I used to, he said before he could craft something safer. I started my company because I wanted to build something that mattered. Mama says cleaning matters, Amara said. She says when people come in and everything is shiny and smells nice, they can think better. She sings when she cleans so that the building won't feel lonely. He pictured a woman pushing a cart under low light, humming to the quiet rooms. The image cut through him with embarrassing precision. He had never once asked who kept the glass immaculate or how the coffee stains disappeared from the boardroom table before 8 a.m. Is your mama good at her job? He asked. The best, Amara said, certainty ringing like a bell. She says you do your best even when nobody's looking. That's character. Character. He had used the word in investor letters. He hadn't tasted it like this, warm and unvarnished, in years. What do you want to be when you grow up, Amara? A doctor, she answered without hesitation. Pediatrics. I'm reading about the heart. Did you know it beats so many times a day? A lot, he said, smiling despite himself. I didn't know the number. About 100,000, she said, pleased. Mama finds me old library books. I use sticky notes to mark the words I don't know. She helps me sound them out when she gets home and drinks tea to stay awake. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk. A sun-bleached picture of a small sailboat, him at 19, beside his father, when knocking their hair sideways, both laughing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed the frame. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Amara, he said, what helps your mama most? The line went quiet, except for the faint rush of a heater. Letting her keep helping people, Amara said at last. That's what she likes. She says helping people is why work matters, even cleaning. His plan clean numbers quick savings suddenly looked brittle. He imagined signing the email effective immediately. He imagined the cart rolling away, the song going with it. He imagined Amara awake past bedtime, eating cereal at a tiny table, waiting for a mother who would come home, smelling like lemon cleaner and wind, and kiss her forehead and ask, "What did you dream? What time does your mother get home?" he asked. "When the sun is trying to wake up," Amara said. "She's exhausted, but she still makes me breakfast. On Saturdays, we go to the library. I get 3 books, sometimes 4, if I promise to read the big ones slowly." He checked the clock on the corner of his screen. 11:42. He had spent 12 minutes doing something he hadn't done in a long time, listening without planning his answer. He said, "I don't want you to be in trouble for talking to me. I'm okay. Mama says if someone calls late, it might be important. She showed me the names. Your building's name was on the phone. Caldwell." She pronounced it carefully, and each syllable was an object she arranged on a shelf. "Amara," he said, and the name steadied him. "Would you tell your mother that Ethan Caldwell called? And that I'd like to meet her Naomi while she's at work tonight. I won't get in her way. I need to understand something. Like what? How the building stays alive when we're not looking." "Oh," she said, satisfied. "Mama can explain that." He laughed, surprised by the sound. "I believe it. Do you make good choices?" she asked suddenly. "Mama says important people should make good choices, not just hard ones." He looked past his reflection in the glass to the city's dark river, the necklace of bridges winking at night. He thought about his inbox, the drafted memo waiting like an accusation. He thought about a 7-year-old measuring the world by whether her mother would be okay in the morning. "I'm trying to," he said. "Tonight, I'm going to try very hard." "Okay," Amara said. He could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm going back to sleep. I have school. We're learning about bones. The smallest one is in the ear. The stapes," he said, dragging an old memory up from a place he hadn't visited in years. She gasped. "You do know things." "Sometimes," he said. "Good night, Amara. Good night, Ethan." The line clicked, and the office fell into the clean, humming quiet of after hours. Ethan stood and crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Far below, Caldwell Tower blinked its steady crown of light into the cold. He imagined a supply closet with a coffee maker and a corkboard crowded with crayon drawings. He imagined a woman in her early 30s, Naomi Johnson, 32, Black American, sliding a cloth beneath a keyboard, making sure not to disturb the small private order of a stranger's desk, humming to keep herself awake, to keep the halls from feeling abandoned. He reached for his coat. The driver's number hovered on his phone, but he put it away and took his keys instead. Some distances required the quiet between stoplights, the chill that crept in through the collar, the sound of your heart deciding who you would be. In the elevator, he caught his reflection, expensive suit loosened at the throat, a face that had learned to reveal nothing, eyes that now betrayed something soft and unsettled. At the lobby, the night concierge startled, then nodded. Outside, the city air was a bit cleaner, and he welcomed the sting for the first time in months. 3 blocks into the drive, he realized He didn't know which entrance the night crew used. He would figure it out. He would ask. He would wait by the service elevator until he heard a voice and a song and the squeak of a cart's wheel that needed oil. And when she turned the corner, he would say her name like a promise he meant to keep, Naomi. The service entrance was nothing like the gleaming glass lobby Ethan Caldwell was used to gliding through. A steel door with chipped paint and a buzzing fluorescent light marked the way in. He had to fumble with his keycard for the first time in years and hope the sensor would recognize his access. It did, and the heavy door opened into a hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and industrial soap. The building felt different at night. It wasn't silent. It breathed with the hum of vents, the faint tick of pipes, and the occasional echo of a cart's wheels. But it lacked the hurried footsteps, the impatient voices, and the clipped efficiency of daytime business. Here, the building revealed its bones. Ethan paused, listening. Then he heard the soft thread of music floating from above. A woman's voice. Gentle, low, untrained but steady, weaving an old soul melody into the sterile air. Naomi. He followed the sound to the elevator and pressed the button for the 28th floor. His heart was pounding harder than he wanted to admit. He'd faced down rivals in boardrooms, fought off hostile takeovers, and stared cameras in the face on national television. Yet the prospect of meeting one woman with a mop and a song unsettled him more than that. The door slid open. The corridor gleamed, as though it had been polished with care, not obligation. Each desk stood in quiet order, papers, squared pens aligned. The song grew clearer, a hushed hymn that made the space feel alive. He followed it until he reached the corner office. His office. The door was ajar. She was inside. Naomi stood with her back to him, wiping down the mahogany desk he had left that afternoon, cluttered with notes and coffee stains. She moved with practiced ease, her motions efficient yet graceful. A faint strand of hair had slipped loose from her bun, brushing her cheek as she leaned to reach the far edge of the desk. She didn't see him at first, and he lingered in the doorway, struck by the realization that he was watching the invisible hands behind his empire. "Excuse me," he said softly. Naomi startled, spinning around. Her eyes widened, and the rag in her hand stilled. For a heartbeat, the music of the building seemed to pause with her. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know anyone was still here. I finish up before employees come back in." "You weren't disturbing me," Ethan said, stepping inside. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you." Her brows drew together. "Talk to me." "Yes." He hesitated. "Naomi, right?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know my name?" "Your daughter told me," Ethan admitted. Her shoulders tensed. "Amara." She answered the phone. "She knows better than that. She didn't do anything wrong," he said quickly. "She was extraordinary." Naomi blinked, suspicious but curious. "Who exactly are you?" He drew in a breath. "Ethan Caldwell, the CEO." The rag slipped from her hand. Color drained from her face. "You're—" She stopped, straightened her spine, and pressed her lips together. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting—" "Please," he interrupted, lifting a hand. "Don't apologize. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me." She studied him warily, trying to gauge his intent. Her expression was a shield dignity and fatigue welded together into composure. "I called tonight to fire you." Ethan admitted the words, sounding harsher in the open air than they had in his head. Her breath caught. Her hand instinctively went to her chest. She looked like she might crumble for a moment, but then her jaw set with quiet strength. "I see." But Amara answered. He continued, almost stumbling over the words. "She told me about you, about how you sing to make the building less lonely, about how you work so she can have a chance at her dream." He swallowed. I couldn't go through with it. Her eyes softened at the mention of her daughter, but hardened again quickly. I need this job, she said firmly. I can do better if something wasn't up to standard. Just tell me what I need to fix. There's nothing to fix, Ethan said. The problem isn't you. It's me. I've been looking at numbers on a spreadsheet instead of people, and your daughter reminded me that every choice I make lands on someone's kitchen table. Naomi's expression wavered. A flicker of weariness passed across her features, then faded behind a veil of guarded professionalism. She's a good kid, she said softly. It is too good for the life I can give her right now. Ethan said you're giving her everything from what she told me. Naomi gave a small laugh that held no humor. Everything except time. I work nights here, mornings at a diner, weekends at a hotel. I try to be present, but sometimes I feel like I'm racing the clock and always losing. He wanted to say something, but the truth was, he didn't know what it meant to live like that. He'd never worried about rent, childcare, or whether dinner could stretch another day. His silence must have shown because Naomi's chin lifted a fraction higher. Why are you really here? Mr. Caldwell? She asked. He said honestly, because I realized tonight, I don't know the first thing about the people who keep my world running, and I want to change that, starting with you. The shield in her eyes wavered again, suspicion battling with an unexpected hope. She searched his face, trying to decide if his words were another form of cruelty dressed in courtesy. Amara believes in you, Ethan said quietly, and I don't want to be the man who proves her wrong. Naomi looked down at the desk, then at the rag on the floor. Slowly she bent to pick it up. When she straightened, her gaze held a steadiness that made Ethan feel more exposed than any investor ever had. You say you want to change, she said, but change costs more than numbers. It costs pride. It costs comfort. It costs sacrifice. Are you prepared for that? Ethan hesitated only a moment. I don't know, but I'd like to try. For the first time, Naomi smiled. It wasn't broad, not even sure, but it was real. Then we could have something to talk about. Her voice was calm, but underneath it lay the weight of a challenge. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like the man with all the power in the room. Instead, he felt like a student about to learn what it meant to make choices that mattered. The hum of the vents filled the silence as the two regarded each other across the freshly polished desk. In that stillness, Ethan realized that the call he had made to erase a line item had instead opened the first chapter of a story that would change everything: his company, his convictions, and maybe even his life. The office lights hummed above them, faint and low, as though the building itself leaned closer to listen. Ethan had stood in this room countless times, yet tonight it felt foreign, warmer, almost human, because Naomi was in it. She wiped the desk, folded the cloth with deliberate care, and then slipped it into her cart. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. Ethan cleared his throat, searching for words that wouldn't sound rehearsed or hollow. You keep this place immaculate, he said. I've never walked in here and noticed something out of place. Naomi gave a quiet laugh that carried no arrogance, just fact. That's the point. If I do my job right, no one notices. Maybe that's the problem, Ethan murmured. Her brow lifted. The problem? He admitted that people like me never stop to see the hands making our lives easier. We walk into clean offices every morning, drink coffee from polished mugs, and never ask who made it possible. That's what your daughter reminded me of tonight. Naomi's face softened at the mention of Amara, but her eyes remained cautious. She had learned to measure men like him, men with wealth, power, and the privilege of distance. She talks too much sometimes, she said. She spoke the truth, Ethan replied, and truth is rarely too much. Naomi leaned against the cart, arms folded. So what happens now? You came to fire me, and then you changed your mind. Does that mean my job is safe? Or are you here to tell me something different? Ethan hesitated. The words forming inside him didn't sound like the clipped, calculated announcements he usually delivered. They sounded dangerous, personal. I don't want to fire you, Naomi. In fact, I came here to understand you. To know why your daughter's words hit me harder than any boardroom debate I've had in years. She studied him in silence. Her expression wasn't hostile. It was survival. The look of someone who'd been promised things before, only to watch them dissolve. What exactly did she say? Naomi asked at last. Ethan leaned on the edge of the desk. You sing when you clean, so the building doesn't feel lonely. That you do your best work, even when no one is watching. That you wake her for school, help her with homework, then come here through the night. She said you believe work isn't just about money. It's about love. For the first time, Naomi looked away, as though the words embarrassed her. That's just how I was raised. You give your best, even if the world gives you nothing back. My daughter deserves to see that. It's more than that, Ethan said gently. She doesn't just see your effort. She sees your strength. She believes in you completely. Naomi's lips pressed together. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. Children believe in their parents because they don't know any better. My job is to ensure she doesn't find out too soon how hard life is. Maybe, Ethan said, but she already understands more than most adults I know. She asked me tonight if I was making a hard choice about you. And I realized I was about to make the easiest, most cowardly choice: cut costs by cutting lives. That confession startled Naomi. Her arms loosened. You said that to her? No, Ethan admitted. But I felt it, and I hated it. The silence thickened again. Naomi moved to the window and pulled aside the blind. The city glittered below, vast and unfeeling. I've worked in this building for almost 3 years, she said. I see those lights every night and wonder about the people behind them. What kind of lives they have, what dreams they chase. I tell myself they must be essential, brilliant. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like if one of them knew my name. She glanced back at him. It's funny that you were going to fire me the first time it happened. Her honesty stung. Ethan wanted to deny it, but denial would be another insult. Instead, he stepped closer. You're right, but I don't want it to end there. Naomi tilted her head, curious but guarded. Then what do you want? I want to know your story, he said. She blinked at him, suspicious again. Why? To ease your conscience. Your daughter reminded me that I lost sight of why I started this company. I want to remember it somewhere along the way, knowing you might help me do that. Naomi stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. You really don't know what you're asking. Then teach me. Her laugh was soft, incredulous. Teach a billionaire CEO about life at the bottom. That's a tall order. I can afford the lesson, he said, almost smiling. She looked at him truly, at him, as though trying to decide whether he was mocking her or sincere. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because her posture eased. All right, Naomi said. You want my story? Here's part of it. I had Amara when I was 25. Her father didn't stay. I worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4, to keep us afloat. I've scrubbed diners, folded hotel sheets, cleaned apartments where people left messes they wouldn't let their dogs live in. And through it all, I tried to give my daughter something constant. A roof, food, a smile when she needed it, books even if they were used. Ethan listened silent. Each detail cut deeper than any quarterly loss. I didn't finish college, she continued. I couldn't afford it. But I read. I learn. I pay attention. And when I clean these offices, I notice things. The pictures on people's desks, the notes they leave, the plants they forget to water. I know your executives better than you do, because I see who they are when no one's watching. Her words struck like truth etched in stone. Ethan realized she was right. He'd memorized resumes, quarterly reports, and performance metrics. But he didn't know who among his people carried grief, or who was quietly proud of a daughter's artwork taped to a cubicle wall. "You know them better than I do," he admitted. Naomi gave a tired smile. "That's because I don't have the luxury of not looking. Seeing people is survival. If I ignore details, I lose my job. If you ignore details, you call it delegation." The observation was cut clean and accurate. Ethan didn't flinch, though he felt the sting. "Naomi," he said, "steady. Now you deserve more than invisibility, and your daughter deserves to see you recognized for it." Her expression shifted again, hope flickering like a candle, but quickly shielded by pragmatism. "Recognition doesn't pay bills, Mr. Caldwell." "Maybe not," he said, "but opportunity does." For the first time, her composure cracked just slightly. "What are you saying?" Ethan drew a breath. "I don't want you to keep this job. Please help me change this company, to help me see what I've been blind to. I need someone who understands people the way you do." She laughed, startled. "You want me to advise you I clean your office, and you see truths I've forgotten how to see." Naomi shook her head, incredulous. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard." "Maybe," Ethan said softly, "but tonight has already been insane. Why not keep going?" She stared at him, weighing the absurdity against the sincerity in his voice. Then she smiled again, wary, but with a spark that hadn't been there before. "We'll see," she said. And for Ethan, we'll see that he felt more promising than any contract he'd signed in years. The night grew deeper, the city beyond the window glowing like a scattered constellation of lights. Inside Ethan's office, time felt suspended. Naomi's cart stood against the wall, rags, neatly folded spray bottles lined up in disciplined rows. She remained by the desk, her posture calm yet steady, as though holding the weight of truths she wasn't sure he deserved to hear. Ethan didn't sit. He found he couldn't. Standing made him feel less like the CEO, and more like a student waiting for a lesson. "You said you wanted to know my story," Naomi began. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried the weight of lived reality. "So here it is. I grew up in a neighborhood where people worked hard, but never seemed to get ahead. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a mechanic. They taught me dignity, taught me to do things right the first time, even if no one noticed. I carried that with me. Still do." She paused, folding her arms across her chest. "I had college plans. Got accepted too. But then life decided I'd learn its lessons another way. My father passed from a stroke, my mother got sick, and suddenly tuition wasn't a priority anymore. Keeping the lights on was." Ethan listened silent. He could picture the girl she once was clutching an acceptance letter, pride shining only to set it aside because survival asked more of her. "I worked wherever I could," Naomi continued. "Diners, department stores, temp agencies. Some jobs barely lasted. Others paid too little to live on. But I kept going. And when Amara was born, well, she became the reason I breathed." At her daughter's name, a soft glow replaced the guarded edge in Naomi's eyes. Ethan leaned forward slightly, caught by the change. "She was so tiny," Naomi said with a smile that was equal parts joy and ache. "I remember holding her and thinking I'll work until my hands break before I let this child go without. And that's what I've done ever since. 3 jobs at once for some years. Sleep in fragments. Meals were skipped so she wouldn't have to. Nights cleaning offices that no one ever imagines are alive with people like me." Ethan exhaled slowly. He felt the chill of his own penthouse echo against her words, a place filled with luxury, but void of sacrifice, empty of love's labor. "Doesn't it exhaust you?" he asked quietly. Naomi laughed, soft but sharp. Of course it does. Some days I can barely keep my eyes open. But when Amara brings me a book and asks me to help her sound out the big words, I remember why I'm doing it. When she told me she wanted to be a doctor, I thought all this would give her the chance I never had. Ethan's throat tightened. She told me about that. About wanting to help people and save lives. Yes, Naomi said proudly. She's fascinated by the human body. She reads medical books like they're fairy tales. And I won't let her think her dream is out of reach just because money is tight. Her gaze slid back to him, piercing. But that's the truth. Money decides whose dreams survive. People like you hold the pen that writes the endings for people like me. The accusation wasn't cruel. It was matter of fact, carved out of years of experience. Ethan wanted to argue, to protest, that he wasn't that kind of man. But the drafted memo waiting on his laptop proved otherwise. You're right. He admitted the words low but honest. I've made choices with blinders on. Numbers, margins, profits. I told myself it was business. But tonight, hearing your daughter... He shook his head. She made me realize those numbers are people, families, dreams. And I was about to erase yours with a signature. Naomi tilted her head, surprised by the confession. Why tell me this? Ethan said. Because I don't want to hide from the truth anymore. Not from you. Not from her. I need to face the damage I almost did. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Naomi pulled out the chair across from his desk and sat, her body tired, but her voice steady. Then listen. Because you'll never understand until you hear what life looks like from this side of the glass. Ethan sat too this time without hesitation. I make schedules like other people make wishes, Naomi said. Every hour accounted for. Wake Amara at 6, breakfast homework review. Walk her to school, then rush to the diner for the morning shift. I am off at 2. Take a quick nap, and then do hotel laundry from 4 to 7. Dinner with Amara. Homework again, leave her with our neighbor Mrs. Collins, and come here by 9. Work through the night, get home when the sun's coming up. 2 hours of sleep if I'm lucky, then do it all again. She rubbed her temples lightly, but her voice didn't waver. I've missed school plays and parent meetings. Birthdays I could only half celebrate before rushing to the next job. And every time I tell Amara it's temporary, that one day I'll have just one job that pays enough. I'll sit in the audience when she gives her graduation speech, but I don't know if that day will ever come. Ethan stared at her, feeling a heaviness he couldn't shake. He had thought himself weary from endless deals and boardroom battles, but his fatigue looked like indulgence compared to her schedule. Naomi, he faltered, unsure if comfort would sound patronizing. That's more strength than I've ever shown in my life. She shook her head. It's not a strength. It's a necessity. Strength is when you have a choice. I don't. The distinction pierced him. He had spent years congratulating himself on grit and resilience, but his choices had always come padded with safety nets. If one deal failed, another would appear. If an investment soured his wealth, absorbed the loss. Naomi had no such luxury. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked. Regret what? Carrying all of this alone. Her eyes softened again, though sadness lingered there. No, because every sacrifice is for her. If the price of her dream is my exhaustion, I'll pay it gladly. Regret only comes when I think about the world, when I think about how unfair it is that some children have every door opened for them, while others have to break themselves to find a keyhole. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. The truth in her words pressed down on him heavier than any quarterly report. And you've never had anyone help you? He asked. Naomi smiled faintly. A few. Neighbors who watched Amara when they could. Teachers who gave her extra books. Strangers who left bigger tips than they realized. Help doesn't always come in big gestures. Sometimes it's a bag of groceries or someone saying, "Take the night off, I'll cover your shift." But in the end, I've learned not to expect it. I stand on my own. She held his gaze firmly, then a silent message in her eyes. Don't mistake me for someone fragile. Ethan nodded slowly. But you shouldn't have to. Naomi gave a small laugh, weary, but tinged with something like defiance. Life doesn't care about should. It just is. You either face it or let it break you. And I don't break. Not while Amara's watching. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a crack in the fortress he had built around himself for decades. In Naomi's words, he heard hardship, dignity, exhaustion, and courage. It humbled him in a way money never could. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Naomi. I don't want to be another man who looks past you. Not anymore. You've taught me more in one conversation than I've learned in years of business, and I can't ignore that. She studied him closely, trying to see if he meant it. Finally, she nodded once, permitting him to carry that weight. Then don't ignore it, she said. The office returned to its quiet hum, but no longer felt sterile. For the first time, Ethan understood that this room, his empire's heart, had been kept alive not by wealth or ambition, but by invisible hands that refused to quit. Hands like Naomi's. And as the night edged toward morning, he realized he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something new, the possibility of change that went beyond profits and touched his soul. The city outside Ethan's office window shifted from black to deep blue, the horizon thinning into the pale line of dawn. He had lost track of time, listening to Naomi. Her story still rang in his chest like a bell, each word, an echo that refused to fade. She had returned to her cart now, wiping the last surface in silence. But the air between them carried weight, as if the night had stitched something permanent into the shared space. Ethan turned his watch over on his wrist. 5:30. The building would soon stir with early arrivals. The security staff, the assistants who liked to prepare before their bosses stormed in. But for now, it was only him and Naomi, two lives stitched together by circumstance and choice. You should head home, he said softly. Amara will be waking soon. Naomi glanced at him, then at the glowing skyline. I always get home before the sun's fully up. Breakfast is our ritual. Even if I'm half asleep, she insists we discuss her dreams at the table. Ethan smiled faintly. Dreams are important. They're survival, Naomi replied. Without them, you forget why you're running in the first place. Her words stayed with him as she packed her supplies, humming again under her breath. The sound was steady, like a thread holding the frayed edges of his thoughts together. When she pushed the cart toward the elevator, Ethan followed without fully deciding to. He wanted to walk her out, though he had no reason. Something about letting her leave without acknowledgement felt wrong. At the lobby doors, Naomi paused, turning toward him. You've heard more of my life than most people ever will. I don't know what you'll do with that, Mr. Caldwell, but I hope you don't forget. He nodded, meaning it. I won't. She gave him a small, cautious smile. Good. Because forgetting is easy for people who live above the glass. For people below it, forgetting isn't an option. Then she pushed through the door, disappearing into the quiet street, where the first buses hissed to a stop and tired workers shuffled to their early shifts. Ethan stood inside the marble lobby, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man looking back. The drive to his penthouse was silent. He didn't bother turning on the radio. The streets were nearly empty, lit by street lamps that hummed against the morning hush. By the time he reached his apartment, the weight in his chest had settled heavier than any exhaustion. He set his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and went to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city. Naomi was cooking breakfast somewhere across those blocks, and her daughter was telling her about dreams. The image carved into him was sharper than any quarterly chart. He made coffee, but barely touched it. Instead, he sat at his desk opening the laptop where the cost-cutting plan still waited. The words stared back. Eliminate cleaning staff contracts. Effective immediately. It was efficient. It was logical. It was the kind of decision CEOs made every day. But now the sentence looked obscene, like a blade poised above lives he could no longer pretend were invisible. Ethan pushed back from the desk, rubbing his temples. He could already hear Harrison Blake, his board chairman, insisting that shareholders demanded sacrifices. The financial hawk Margaret Chin would argue that numbers didn't lie, and the others, half of them, would nod along, more afraid of losing face than losing integrity. But he also heard Naomi's voice. Dreams are survival. And Amara's, are you making a hard choice about my mama? He shut the laptop firmly, the sound echoing in the cavernous apartment. For years he had measured his worth by deals, closed companies acquired, and competitors crushed. But none of those victories had ever felt as significant as the shame he now felt staring at a spreadsheet. By late morning, Ethan forced himself into a shower and dressed casually instead of his usual armor of tailored suits. He couldn't shake the need to walk into his office building, not as the man who owned it, but as a man trying to understand it. When he arrived, the day staff greeted him with surprised smiles, not used to seeing him before noon. He ignored their polite shock and headed upstairs. The offices looked pristine, every surface gleaming. Naomi's invisible fingerprints lingered everywhere, proof of work no one valued until it was gone. He sat at his desk staring at the faded photograph in the corner. A boat on open water. He hadn't seen it in years, but Naomi had noticed instantly. She had been right. He had forgotten what mattered. The phone buzzed on his desk. Patricia Wong, his human resources director. Mr. Caldwell, the board wants to confirm the details of the cost reduction plan for next week's meeting. Ethan hesitated, then answered. Patricia, I want the complete personnel files on our contracted staff, especially the cleaning team. She paused. The cleaning team, sir? Yes, he said firmly. And everything about Johnson Services. Their hiring practices, benefits records, whatever you can find. All right, Patricia replied carefully. I'll have a folder prepared. When he hung up, Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He knew he was stepping onto dangerous ground. Every minute he delayed, the cuts pressure from the board would mount. But for the first time in years, the fear of shareholders didn't outweigh the fear of betraying himself. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He paced the apartment, restless, as though each step might shake loose the decision weighing on him. He imagined calling Naomi to reassure her, and telling Amara her mama's job was safe. But words without action meant nothing. By 2 a.m, he poured himself another coffee and opened the Johnson Services file Patricia had delivered. He scanned the reports, frowning. The company specialized in hiring single parents, offering flexible schedules and modest benefits. They weren't faceless labor. They were families surviving on the scraps of bigger corporations. People like Naomi. People like Amara. Every line of the report was another nail in the coffin of the cost-cutting plan. If he approved the cuts, he wouldn't just be eliminating expenses. He'd be tearing apart the fragile web that held lives together. At dawn again, he stood at his window. The city blinked awake, traffic, swelling horns cutting through the cool morning air. Ethan pressed his hand against the glass, the cold surface grounding him. The truth was simple. He could sign the cuts, preserve his position, fight the board, and risk everything. He thought of Naomi's words. Strength is when you have a choice. I don't. For once he realized he did, and that choice would define him far more than any deal ever had. Later that day he called Patricia again. Schedule a meeting with Johnson Services supervisor and Naomi Williams, directly. Patricia sounded surprised, but professional. Should I inform the board? No, Ethan said, his voice steady now. Not yet. This isn't for them. This is for me. He hung up, a strange calm settling over him. For years, dawn had meant another day of numbers, deadlines, and acquisitions. Today, it meant something else entirely. It meant the beginning of a decision that would either break him or finally make him whole. By noon the next day, the boardroom looked like a tribunal. Sunlight struck the long gloss of the walnut table and turned every water glass into a cold, bright coin. The chairs around it were already filled. Harrison Blake at the head with his careful gravitas. Margaret Kane with a legal pad aligned to the edge like a blade. The rest of the directors arranged in their practiced neutrality. Ethan stepped in without his usual armor, a fitted suit and impenetrable tone, and took the seat he had earned a decade ago with nothing but nerve and sleeplessness. Today, he felt awake in a different way. Harrison folded his hands. We're here to finalize the cost reductions for Q3. Procurement delivered a list. Cleaning contracts are the most significant immediate lever that doesn't affect core ops. Unless you have a stronger alternative, we move. Margaret didn't wait for permission. We've indulged months of drift. Shareholders want action. This is math, not morality. Ethan let the silence stretch long enough for the room to lean in. It is math, he said, and the math is incomplete. Brows rose. Margaret's pen clicked once in audible doubt. He slid a single folder to the center of the table. No 90-slide deck. No swelling forecasts. Just one thin spine, the weight of his decision inside it. We've priced the contract. We haven't priced consequences. If we cut night cleaning, we'll erode productivity, increase turnover, and inject avoidable friction into revenue teams already running hot. Margaret's smile was impatient. Your hand waving. Where are the numbers? On your own P&L history, Ethan said evenly. Each voluntary exit in the last 18 months cost us 3 to 6 months of lost output and ramp. Every unforced error on a client deliverable costs us goodwill and concessions. We're paying those costs because people work in conditions that nudge them toward fatigue and out the door. Cutting the team that keeps the engine clean reduces speed and invites breakage. You'll call the savings a win until the repairs eat them whole. A rumble of shifting posture circled the table. Harrison watched him with the expression he reserved for storms he might let break if they promised rain. Margaret leaned forward. Fine. Address turnover, not janitors. I am, Ethan said, because the janitors are people. So are the analysts, engineers, and managers who come in at 8 and find order instead of friction. We keep pretending these are separate systems. They're not. Harrison gestured an invitation to step beyond rhetoric. Proposal. Ethan nodded. Freeze executive travel and entertainment for 1 quarter. Defer non-essential facility upgrades. Consolidate 2 lightly used satellite floors into 1. Renegotiate 2 vendor contracts we've rolled year over year without competition. We can reach the board's target without cutting the night crew. That buys time, not discipline, Margaret said. We need a durable structure, not patches. Agreed, Ethan said. I want to pilot a role we've been missing, director of employee experience. Not a feel-good title. A cross-functional operator tasked with removing daily friction, improving focus time, and designing humane policies that keep our talent here. The mandate is measurable. Fewer exits, lower overtime, higher completion rates on critical paths. Several directors exchanged quick, skeptical glances. You want to add a salaried head to avoid cutting a contract? Someone asked. I want to stop mistaking neglect for efficiency, Ethan replied. We've been penny-wise and culture-blind. It's costing us. Margaret's pen clicked again. Since when do we benchmark compassion? Since we realized it's cheaper than attrition, Ethan said quietly. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to test it. Give me 6 weeks. We track retention risk flags, project cycle times, and overtime hours. If the needle doesn't move, I'll implement your cuts myself. The room stilled. It wasn't a bluff. They could all hear it in his voice. He had taken the bet and put his own hand under the blade. Harrison tapped his knuckle on the folder. Who leads this role? I have someone in mind, Ethan said. A person who understands the building from the floor up, who's noticed what we can't see because we don't have to. I'll bring a candidate through HR and compliance like anyone else. Margaret's mouth was curved and predatory, someone from the cleaning vendor. Ethan didn't look away. Someone qualified to see people. She laughed once, disbelieving. We are not a charity. No, Ethan said. We're a company. And companies win when they remove obstacles between their people and their best work. The room is divided along invisible seams. A few directors listened as if they'd been waiting to hear something like this and didn't know it until now. A few wore the fixed expressions of those specific that any deviation from the familiar was sin. Harrison exhaled through his nose, then nodded to himself. 3 weeks, he said. Ethan held his gaze. 6. 4. Harrison countered. We reconvene. Show trend lines, not anecdotes. Margaret lifted her pen like a gavel. And the cuts, postponed, Harrison said, before she could pronounce them. Contingent on results. We proceed with the original plan, if we don't see motion in 4 weeks. Margaret's eyes flashed. We're letting sentiment dictate governance. We're letting data have time to appear, Harrison replied. Then to Ethan, you have your window. Please don't waste it. Ethan nodded once. I won't. The meeting dissolved into side chatter and calendar wrangling. Margaret lingered just long enough to feel like a verdict. Hope, she murmured. Gathering her pad is not a strategy. Ethan smiled without warmth. Neither is amputation as first aid. When she left, the air felt marginally lighter. He stayed behind, palms flat on the table, waiting for his pulse to match the metronome of the building. The window framed a view he had seen 1,000 times and never noticed the thin river dragging light across its surface, the blocky squat of the neighboring tower's roof garden, the black specks of birds cutting up the wind. He thought of a cart's loose wheel and a melody in the vents. Patricia appeared in the doorway, cautious. How did it go? I have 4 weeks, he said. We're pausing the cuts. I want to move now. She stepped in, professional, even in relief. Please tell me what you need. An employee survey, but not the kind we've done before. Short, practical, safe. Ask what makes focus hard. Ask what would help people leave on time. No names. No traps. Patricia nodded, taking notes. We'll need a trusted face on it. Someone who can talk to folks without making them defensive. I know, Ethan said. Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. I want to bring in a candidate for the director role. We'll do this quickly by the book: job description, scope, reporting lines, compensation. Patricia hesitated. We'll get pushback. We already have pushback, he said. Let's trade it for progress. She allowed herself a small smile. Yes, sir. When she left, he took out his phone and hovered over a contact he'd added the night before, a number lifted from the vendor roster and scribbled in his notebook like a secret. He pressed call before he could overthink it. Hello? Naomi's voice was soft, the tired that had learned to make room for grace anyway. It's Ethan, he said. I hope I'm not waking you. You're not, she said. I'm making tea. I stood in front of the board, he said. I told them we cut people at our peril. I asked for a trial to fix what's fixable before we amputate what's vital. I got 4 weeks. On the other end, a brief, incredulous silence. You did that? I did, he said, and I meant it. But I need help the kind you can give. Please come in tomorrow and talk to HR and me about a role. We'll write it together. We'll guard it with metrics, not promises. And if you say no, I'll understand. This can't be charity. It has to be a partnership. He heard the click of a stove turning off the quiet of a kitchen holding its breath. You want me to advise your company, she said. Not a question, so much as an act of translation. He said, I want you to help me see and fix the things that make good people stumble. You told me you noticed. I believe you. I want to put that noticing to work. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried a wary steadiness. If I say yes, I'm not a mascot. I'm not your redemption arc. I'm there to do a job and to tell you the truth, even when it's ugly. I expect nothing less, he said. Another pause, lighter now. Then I'll come in, tomorrow. But I'm bringing questions. Bring as many as you like, he said. I'll try to have answers. They hung up, and he stared at the phone for a moment longer, as if the last few minutes might evaporate if he looked away. They didn't. The room still smelled faintly of polished wood and old arguments. Outside, the afternoon had edged toward evening, and the first lamps were winking to life along the street. He gathered the folder from the center of the table and slipped it under his arm. On his way out, he paused by the custodial closet near the service elevator, the one door he'd never noticed until last night. It was closed now, quiet, unremarkable. He touched the handle anyway, a slight acknowledgement to the world behind it. Back in his office, he drafted the job description with an urgency that felt like honesty. Remove friction. Protect focus. Build trust. Measure everything. He stripped the language of buzzwords until what remained was work that mattered or didn't deserve to exist. When the screen finally dimmed, he realized he was smiling, not because he had won, but because he had chosen a fight worth losing if it came to that. Across town, a kettle clicked cool. In a small kitchen, a girl explained to her mother why the stapes was her favorite bone, and why hearts beat so many times a day. In the space between those homes, a company turned ever so slightly toward the people who lifted it. 4 weeks, he thought. Then he opened a fresh document and wrote the first question he wanted to ask every employee in the morning. What one change would make your best work easier today? The next morning, the city pulsed awake with its usual rhythm. Honking, horns, hurried footsteps, the hum of elevators climbing steel and glass towers. But inside the headquarters of Caldwell Enterprises, a different rhythm was forming. Ethan sat at the head of a smaller conference table, one not reserved for shareholders or directors, but for beginnings. Patricia Wong entered first, efficient as ever, holding a stack of papers clipped neatly. Behind her walked Naomi, dressed plainly but neatly, her presence both humble and unshakably steady. She scanned the room like someone who had learned long ago to read every space she entered. Ethan rose. Naomi, thank you for coming. She offered a slight nod, lips pressed tight. I said I would. Patricia gestured to the folder. I prepared a draft for the position description you mentioned, Mr. Caldwell. She hesitated, eyes sliding briefly to Naomi. However, it's not exactly conventional. Good, Ethan said. Conventional hasn't been working. They sat. Patricia opened the folder and read aloud, Director of Employee Experience. Responsibilities: design surveys, collect feedback, analyze barriers to productivity, propose solutions, and advise leadership on workplace culture. Naomi raised her brows slightly. That sounds like a lot of responsibility for one person. It is, Ethan admitted, but it's also a role meant to grow. We need someone who sees what others overlook, someone who knows the difference between a spotless desk and a desperate employee. Naomi's eyes flicked to him, searching for insincerity. Finding none, she leaned back. I'll need authority, not just a title. If people think I'm a token, or my words stop at your desk, no one will take me seriously. Ethan nodded. Then the authority you'll have: direct reporting to me, full access to department heads, transparency on budget allocation, and will publish metrics openly. Patricia scribbled notes, clearly uncomfortable, but dutiful. Naomi looked thoughtful. Metrics are fine, but numbers don't tell everything. People lie on surveys if they don't feel safe. They hide their struggles because they think it makes them weak. To get real answers, I'll need trust. And trust takes time. Ethan leaned forward. How would you build it? Naomi tapped her fingers lightly on the table. Start small. Conversations in break rooms, not boardrooms. Anonymous boxes for concerns. Ask questions focusing on what would help, not what's wrong. People want to be heard without being punished for it. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not doubt, but admiration. She spoke with the certainty of someone who had lived on the margins of workplaces her whole life. She understood the invisible current beneath the polished surface. Then that's what we'll do, he said. Patricia looked between them, uncertain if this was idealism or strategy. If we're serious, we'll need a plan before the board checks in again. 4 weeks isn't long. Then we start today, Ethan replied. Survey drafts will be done by tomorrow, and department listening sessions will be next week. And Naomi? He met her gaze directly. I'll walk beside you. If anyone questions your legitimacy, they'll answer to me. Her expression softened, though her voice stayed firm. Words are easy, Ethan. I'll believe it when I see it. The following days were unlike anything the company had experienced. Naomi didn't set up camp in a plush office. Instead, she moved floor to floor carrying a notebook rather than a laptop, sitting with employees in the cafeteria, the break room, the narrow spaces where truth slipped out between bites of sandwiches and sighs of fatigue. At first, people were cautious. Why would someone they'd never seen in management want to know about their stress? But Naomi's presence disarmed them. She asked simple questions. What makes your day harder than it should be? What would help you go home on time? Answers spilled out. Too much noise in open offices. No quiet space for focused work. Lunch breaks were spent at desks because the break room felt cramped and lifeless. Parents hide childcare conflicts out of fear of looking uncommitted. Naomi wrote it all down, patient, never promising what she couldn't deliver. But she really listened in a way most managers never had. Ethan watched from a distance, at first uneasy about interfering. Yet he noticed something shift. People smiled when they saw her coming. Conversations sparked in hallways that had long felt sterile. For the first time, employees believed their voices might matter. At week's end, Naomi and Ethan sat side by side in his office, a stack of notes between them. Naomi flipped through the pages. The themes are clear distractions, lack of proper space, financial stress, and rigid schedules. Ethan rubbed his temple. All things we can address. Quiet zones, break room renovations, flexible hours. Even small stipends for meals would make a difference. Naomi nodded. Yes, but implementation matters. If it feels like a bandage, people will dismiss it. They need to see it's part of something lasting. Ethan sighed. And that's where the board will fight me. Then show them proof, Naomi said. Hard numbers. Reduced overtime, fewer resignations, better productivity. They can argue with feelings, but they can't argue with results. Ethan smiled faintly. You sound like you've been doing this for years. Naomi shrugged. When you spend your life invisible, you notice what the visible miss. Her words cut deep. Ethan realized how blind he had been all along. How many people had been right in front of him, quietly holding the company together while he never even saw them. By the second week, the first small changes rolled out. 2 conference rooms were converted into quiet zones. The break room received new seating, fresh paint, and basic appliances that actually worked. A pilot flexible schedule policy was launched in one department. The results were immediate. Employees lingered in the break room laughing over shared meals, instead of eating alone at desks. The quiet zones were filled with focused workers who were finishing projects faster. Parents reported less stress, knowing they could adjust their schedules when necessary. Patricia delivered the data astonished. Over time, costs are already down 12%. Early feedback also shows that productivity has increased across 2 departments. Ethan glanced at Naomi, who only gave a small smile. "Told you," she said, but not everyone celebrated. Whispers trickled from upper management skepticism that this experiment was more than a CEO indulging a guilty conscience. Margaret Kane sent pointed emails requesting cost breakdowns. Harrison reminded Ethan during a call that the board expects tangible results. Sentiment won't save you. The pressure mounted, but Ethan refused to back down. Nights found him pacing his apartment, revising presentations, aligning charts, preparing for the battle ahead. Yet through the noise, one thing steadied him: the memory of Amara's voice on the phone, asking if he was making a hard choice about her mother. He would not fail that child. At the end of the second week, Ethan called Naomi into his office. "The board will want a progress update soon. We'll need to present together." Naomi frowned. "Me? They won't listen to me." "They will," Ethan said firmly, "because you'll be speaking the truth they can't ignore. Numbers will back you, but your voice will matter most." She studied him for a long moment. "Do you really believe that I do?" he said. "And if they try to silence you, they'll have to go through me." For the first time since they had met, Naomi allowed herself a genuine smile. Not cautious, not wary, but warm. "Then let's make sure they can't." Long after the building had emptied late that night, Ethan remained in his office. The quiet felt alive, echoing with Naomi's footsteps and the faint melody she always hummed while cleaning. He thought about how close he had come to erasing her life from this building with a single keystroke. Instead, she had become the bridge between him and the employees, between the company and its conscience. The next battle loomed, but for the first time, Ethan didn't feel alone. The boardroom felt colder than usual. It could be the air conditioning humming too loudly, or the weight of expectation hung in the glass-walled chamber. The directors sat in their accustomed positions, polished and deliberate, each a guardian of numbers and tradition. At the far end of the table, Margaret Kane tapped her pen against a folder. Her expression sharpened with impatience. Harrison Blake sat beside her, inscrutable as always, though his eyes flicked toward Ethan with the calculation of a man gauging which way the wind might turn. Ethan walked in first. His shoulders squared, but his pulse quickened. He had rehearsed every chart, every projection, every phrase. Yet, as he took his seat at the head of the table, he knew the data alone would not sway this group. The board valued proof, yes, but their comfort was with control. Today, he would ask them to release their grip. Then the door opened again. Naomi stepped inside, calm and steady, carrying only a notebook and pen. She did not wear the polished armor of executives. No tailored suit, no expensive accessories. Her presence was different, real, undeniable. She walked to the empty chair beside Ethan and sat without hesitation, her hands folded neatly on the table. A ripple of surprise moved around the board. Margaret spoke first, her tone slicing. And who exactly? Ethan didn't flinch. "This is Naomi Williams. She led the Employee Feedback Initiative and oversaw the trial programs we've implemented over the past 2 weeks. She's here to present findings." Margaret arched a brow. "Findings or anecdotes?" "Results," Ethan said firmly. "And she'll show you herself." He gestured for Naomi to begin. She opened her notebook, voice steady, though not loud. We asked employees simple questions. What makes your work harder than it should be? What would help you go home on time? What do you need to do your job better? We collected responses anonymously and listened face-to-face in break rooms, not formal meetings. What we learned was consistent. She turned a page. Employees struggle with focus because of noise and constant interruptions. They eat lunch at their desks because the break room is uninviting. Parents are stressed because rigid schedules punish them for caring for children. These problems may sound small, but they create bigger costs. Burnout, turnover, lost productivity. Margaret's pen clicked a dismissive rhythm. This is hardly groundbreaking. People always complain. Naomi didn't flinch. She met Margaret's gaze directly. Yes, people complain. But when complaints repeat across dozens of voices, they reveal systemic problems. Problems that cost money, whether we acknowledge them or not. The firmness in her tone silenced even Margaret for a moment. Ethan slid a report forward. We've already piloted changes, quiet zones, renovated break room, and flexible scheduling in 2 departments. Within 2 weeks, overtime, costs dropped by 12%. Productivity increased in measurable deliverables by 14%. Turnover risk flags fell by nearly a third. These are not soft metrics, they're hard financial outcomes. Harrison leaned back, studying the numbers. Early signs, he said cautiously. But sustained trends matter more than 2 weeks of novelty. Agreed, Ethan replied. So we're asking for continued support. Give us the 4 weeks promised. Let the data compound. We'll provide complete transparency, weekly updates, detailed metrics, and testimonials. If outcomes don't hold, we reevaluate. Margaret's lips curved into something like a smile, though it held no warmth. You've become quite the evangelist for comfort. Tell me, Miss Williams, what qualifies you to advise a corporation of this size? Do you have degrees in organizational psychology? Experience in management consulting? The room turned to Naomi. For a moment, silence pressed against her. Then she spoke with quiet conviction. No, I don't have a degree in psychology or a resume full of titles. What I have is a lifetime of watching workplaces from the ground. I've seen what leaders ignore because they don't live it. I know what invisible labor looks like and how it feels when companies treat people as disposable. That perspective is my qualification. Her words landed with weight. Even those predisposed to dismiss her seemed to hesitate. Ethan felt pride surge in his chest, not because she defended herself, but because she did it without apology. Margaret's eyes narrowed. So we should gamble millions on your perspective? No, Naomi said evenly. You should invest because ignoring problems is already costing you millions. You just haven't measured it honestly. Harrison's gaze flicked between them. His voice, calm but probing, broke the silence. And you, Ethan, why stake your reputation on this? 6 months ago, you wouldn't have entertained such a proposal. Ethan took a breath. I forgot why I built this company first. It wasn't to cut costs until nothing human remained. It was to create value, to make something enduring. We cannot claim to build a future if we destroy the people meant to carry us there. This trial is not sentiment, it's strategy. Treating employees as assets rather than expenses increases loyalty, reduces risk, and drives sustainable growth. If we can prove it here, we'll gain an advantage no competitor can easily replicate. A hush followed. The weight of his words filled the room more than any chart could. Finally, Harrison folded his hands. Here's my proposal. We extend the trial but under strict oversight. Weekly progress reports. Budget discipline. If metrics don't show consistent improvement at the 4-week mark, we terminate the experiment and implement the cuts immediately. Margaret nodded sharply. That is the only reasonable compromise. Ethan met Naomi's eyes, then turned back. Agreed. We'll deliver the results. The meeting adjourned, directors filing out in murmurs. Harrison lingered, his voice lower now. You've chosen a risky path, Ethan. But sometimes risk shakes a company awake. Don't waste your chance. When they were alone, Ethan turned to Naomi. She looked calm, but he could see the tension in how her hand gripped the notebook. You were extraordinary, he said. She gave a small, tired laugh. I just told the truth. Whether they heard it is another matter. They did. Ethan said, even if they haven't admitted it yet. She studied him. You've tied yourself to me now. If I fail, you fail. Then we won't fail, he answered. Naomi shook her head, almost amused by his certainty. You're stubborn. Determined, he corrected. And I believe in this. In you. Her expression softened for a heartbeat. Then she stood. Belief is good. Proof is better. Let's give them both. Back in his office that evening, Ethan reviewed the day's events. The confrontation with the board had not been a victory, not yet. But it had been a foothold, a chance to climb. He stared out at the skyline lights flickering against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Naomi was likely making dinner for Amara, listening to her stories, asking about her dreams. The thought steadied him. This fight was not just about quarterly earnings or shareholder appeasement. It was about whether a company could choose humanity without losing its edge. And if they could prove it here, others would follow. Ethan felt the horizon hold more than numbers for the first time in years. It held meaning. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The weeks that followed the boardroom standoff felt like walking a tightrope over a storm. Ethan and Naomi pushed forward relentlessly, transforming ideas into action, with the urgency of people who knew they were on borrowed time. The quiet zones were expanded to more departments. The break room renovation, modest but thoughtful, drew more people away from their desks. Flexible scheduling spread cautiously across teams, giving single parents relief and workaholics the balance they hadn't realized they needed. Naomi moved through the building like a compass, steady observant, taking the company's pulse in small conversations that no spreadsheet could capture. Ethan became her translation partner, turning her observations into data that board members would at least pretend to respect. And for a while, the numbers were in their favor. Productivity climbed by 15%. Overtime costs dropped. Turnover slowed to a trickle. The human mood shifted in ways even skeptics noticed. People laughed more, looked less drained, carried themselves, as if the company finally saw them. But change, no matter how promising, rarely arrives unchallenged. The storm broke on a gray Wednesday morning. Ethan arrived early, only to find Patricia waiting by his office door with a stack of reports in her hands and concern across her face. There's been a development, she said without preamble. He took the paper, scanning. Revenue projections, cash flow statements, accounts receivable. Then he saw a red line under a client's name that twisted his stomach. Morrison Industries, he read aloud. Patricia nodded grimly. They've filed for bankruptcy, effective immediately. Ethan sank into his chair, the weight of the news heavy on his chest. They owe us $3.2 million. Yes, Patricia confirmed, and that revenue represented nearly 15% of our quarterly forecast. The room seemed smaller, the air thinner. This wasn't just a stumble. It was an earthquake. What's the board's reaction? He asked. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow afternoon, Patricia replied. I don't need to tell you what this means. They'll demand cuts. Real cuts. Ethan closed the folder, pressing his palms against it. He could already hear Margaret's voice, cold and sharp. This proves our programs are luxuries we can't afford. Naomi arrived later that morning, carrying her usual notebook. She noticed Ethan's expression immediately. What happened? He hesitated, then handed her the report. She read in silence, her jaw tightening. This isn't good. It's worse than bad, Ethan admitted. The board will use this as an excuse to gut everything we've built. They'll say we can't afford to invest in employees while revenue is bleeding. Naomi closed the folder and looked at him. Then, we must show them the opposite, that cutting people will make survival impossible. We need proof stronger than ever. That night, Ethan worked until the city outside his window was a blur of lights against the storm. His apartment felt cavernous, a hollow luxury. He thought about Naomi at home with Amara, probably helping her sound out medical terms from a borrowed book. They were his anchor now, even if they didn't fully realize it. At 2 a.m, his phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. Don't lose focus. We fight brighter, not louder. The words steadied him. The next day, the emergency board meeting unfolded exactly as Ethan had feared. We're facing a multi-million-dollar shortfall. Margaret began crisply, her folder already open to neatly tabulated figures. The obvious course is to implement cost reductions immediately. Non-essential program services and personnel must be cut. That includes cleaning contracts and the so-called employee experience initiatives. Several directors murmured in agreement. Harrison remained quiet, his eyes on Ethan. Ethan stood papers in hand, but his heart was pounding with conviction. We cannot respond to a financial crisis by hollowing ourselves out. Cutting these programs will not save us. It will accelerate our decline. Our early data proves it. Margaret scoffed. Data over 2 weeks. We're talking about millions, not morale. Ethan placed graphs on the table. Turnover is down by 30%. Overtime costs reduced by nearly a fifth. Productivity up double digits. Those aren't morale metrics. They're financial ones. Removing these programs is like pulling supports from a bridge during a storm. Margaret leaned forward. And what do you propose instead? Magic, hope, no. Ethan replied evenly. Sacrifice. But not from the bottom. From the top. The room went still. I propose a 20% reduction in executive salaries and bonuses for the next 12 months. Ethan continued. We eliminate redundant perks, luxury retreats, unnecessary travel, inflated allowances. That combined with renegotiating vendor contracts closes the gap without dismantling the foundation we've just begun to strengthen. The silence was sharp, broken only by Margaret's bitter laugh. Do you expect executives to bleed while janitors keep cushy, flexible schedules? Sitting quietly at the edge of the room, Naomi spoke up then. Her voice was calm, but it carried. Those janitors, those employees with flexible schedules, they are the ones keeping this company alive. They clean your offices, meet deadlines, manage clients, and build the product. Cut them, and you'll have savings on paper and collapse in practice. Why should anyone else believe in this company if executives won't sacrifice? Her words pierced through the boardroom like a shard of glass. Several directors shifted uncomfortably. Even Harrison's expression softened with something like reluctant respect. Margaret glared. This is sentiment masquerading as strategy. Naomi held her gaze. No. This is survival grounded in reality. You don't like who reality asks to sacrifice. After 2 hours of debate, the board voted. The result was close 5 in favor of Ethan's plan, 7 against. Margaret's motion carried the employee programs would be terminated, and Naomi's position dissolved. The blow hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. He tried to argue to delay, but Harrison raised a hand. The board has spoken. The programs end on Monday. Naomi said nothing. She gathered her notebook, her eyes steady but shadowed, and walked out of the room. That evening, Ethan found her in the break room. Ironically, the space she had transformed. She stood by the coffee machine, staring at the fresh paint, as if committing it to memory. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was rough. I fought, But it wasn't enough. Naomi turned, her expression tired but calm. You don't need to apologize. We both knew this fight wouldn't be easy. They've erased everything he said bitterly. Your role. The programs. All of it. No, she corrected gently. They've erased funding. They can't erase what people felt. They can't erase the fact that employees were heard maybe for the first time. That stays, even if the programs don't. Ethan's throat tightened. What will you do? I'll go back to cleaning, she said. It's still work, still honest. Amara still needs me. I'll do what I've always done. The quiet in the room was heavy. Ethan wanted to promise her the world, to swear he'd fix everything, but he knew empty promises would only dishonor the trust she had given him. Instead, he said, I will find a way to rebuild this. Maybe not tomorrow, next month. But I swear to you, Naomi, this isn't over. She gave him a long look, her eyes glistening though she didn't cry. Then I'll hold you to it. That night, Ethan walked out of the building later than usual. The city lights stretched endlessly, but they looked hollow for the first time in years. He thought of Naomi driving home in her aging car, Amara waiting with questions about homework and dreams of medicine. The board had won this battle. But in the quiet resolve that settled over him, Ethan knew the war was far from finished. He had found something worth fighting for, and no boardroom could take that away. The weeks following the board's decision were some of the darkest Ethan had ever endured. The building felt heavier, its polished marble floors and gleaming glass now reflecting an atmosphere of gloom. Employees shuffled silently through hallways that had once buzzed with cautious optimism. The freshly painted and renewed break room, which had only been renewed a month earlier now, sat half empty at lunch. The quiet zones were deserted, stripped of their original purpose by a memo that declared them non-essential. Naomi returned to her night shift. Ethan often stayed late, partly because he dreaded his empty apartment, and partly because he needed to see her to remind himself that their fight had meant something. He found her one evening dusting a conference room that had hosted battles she had never been meant to win. You shouldn't still be here, she said softly when he walked in. And yet, here we are, he replied. Both of us. Still here. Naomi glanced up, her smile faint but resilient. Because people like us don't vanish just because others pretend we don't matter. Then one afternoon, the tide shifted in a way neither of them could have predicted. Patricia knocked on Ethan's office door with an expression caught between disbelief and cautious hope. There's someone you need to meet, she said. A woman entered, elegant and confident, carrying the poise that made entire rooms pause. She introduced herself with a firm handshake. Elizabeth Morrison. Ethan froze. Morrison Industries, the client whose bankruptcy had nearly toppled his company. You're related to my father, Elizabeth confirmed. He built Morrison Industries, and he destroyed it. But I'm not here for his legacy. I'm here because I've been watching yours. Ethan frowned, uncertain. Watching Elizabeth nodded. Your employee programs. The ones your board just cut. I've read about them. I've spoken to people who worked here. And I know this, you were right. My father's company collapsed not because of competition, but because he forgot his employees were human beings. I don't want that fate repeated anywhere else. When summoned at Patricia's request, Naomi stood quietly by the wall listening. Elizabeth noticed her immediately. You must be Naomi, she said warmly. I've heard you were the heart behind those programs. Naomi blinked, caught off guard. I wouldn't say that. I just listened. And that's precisely why it worked, Elizabeth replied. Over coffee in Ethan's office, Elizabeth laid out her proposal. She had inherited her father's personal wealth, untainted by the bankruptcy, and she wanted to invest $5 million into Caldwell Enterprises. Her single condition was the reinstatement and expansion of the employee programs, with Naomi officially restored as Director of Employee Experience. Ethan leaned back, stunned. You realize the board will resist. They'll see this as interference. Elizabeth smiled. They'll see it as survival. You've already proven your ideas save money. I'll prove they attract capital. With my investment, you won't just weather this storm. You'll lead a new model for how companies can treat people. And you'll have me as a board ally, someone who understands exactly what happens when leadership forgets its soul. Ethan felt the flicker of hope return for the first time in weeks. Naomi, however, remained cautious. It sounds too good to be true. Elizabeth leaned toward her. It's not charity. It's business. Companies that treat people well outperform those that don't. And frankly, I'd rather place my money with a man who risked his career for his employees than with executives who still believe cutting cleaning staff will save their empire. Naomi's lips curved into a small smile. This may be the start of something better. The following week, Elizabeth presented her proposal to the board. The directors were initially stunned, skeptical, but unable to deny that an investment of that scale could stabilize the company instantly. Margaret Kane tried to dismiss it. This is a gimmick, and tying funding to employee programs is reckless. Elizabeth's gaze cut sharply. What's reckless is ignoring the human beings who build your profits. I watched it destroy my father's company. If you're wise, you'll learn from his mistakes. If not, I'll take my money elsewhere. The vote was contentious, but ultimately in Ethan's favor. The investment passed. Naomi's role was reinstated, the programs revived, and the boardroom felt less like a battlefield and more like a bridge for the first time in months. What followed was a transformation greater than even Ethan had imagined. The programs expanded beyond quiet zones and flexible schedules. On-site childcare was introduced. Educational stipends allowed employees to take courses they had never dreamed of affording. Mental health support became available, reducing burnout. Naomi designed mentorship programs that connected junior employees with veterans, building a community where there had once been only hierarchy. Numbers soared. Employee satisfaction reached record highs. Productivity grew steadily. Turnover costs plummeted. And perhaps most telling, the company's reputation shifted. Clients spoke of Caldwell Enterprises not just as efficient, but as ethical, a place where business had a human face. Amidst the professional victories, personal ones blossomed quietly. Ethan invited Naomi and Amara to his home for dinner one evening. They cooked together, laughter spilling into a penthouse that had long echoed with silence. Amara explored every corner wonderfully, declaring the view from the windows better than 1,000 stars. Naomi teased Ethan about his clumsy attempts at making salad, and for the first time he felt what family might mean. It is not a photo opportunity origin or something living and warm. When Amara fell asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket too big for her, Ethan turned to Naomi. This started with a phone call. A child's voice asking if I was making a hard choice. I think she saved me before she even knew me. Naomi's expression softened. She saved me too every day. Months later, when Caldwell Enterprises was featured on the cover of Business Weekly as the company that proves caring pays off, Ethan knew the article wasn't really about him. It was about Naomi, Amara, and every employee who had once eaten alone at their desk, but now felt they belonged. And Ethan dropped to one knee in the park on a sunny Saturday with Naomi by his side and Amara chasing butterflies nearby. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Ethan held out a small ring box. This isn't about rescuing anyone. It's about partnership, about building something together. You, me, Amara, if you'll let me. Will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was steady. Yes. Amara ran over confused at first, then squealing joyfully when she understood. Does that mean I get a daddy now? Ethan's throat tightened. If you'll have me. She hugged him fiercely. Best choice ever. From that moment, Ethan's life no longer belonged to empty boardrooms or cold spreadsheets. It belonged to the laughter in his home, the voices of employees who finally felt seen, and the little girl who had changed everything with one late-night question. He often told the story when asked how his company had transformed. He'd end with the exact words every time. It all started because I picked up the phone and actually listened. And if you've read this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe businesses can truly balance profit and humanity? Drop your answer in the comments below. I have read everyone's. If this story moved you, give it a like, let me know and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. After all, stories like this are only worth telling if we share them.